Hello, everybody, and welcome to another community
First of all, Mayor, thank you very
conversation
much for giving me the
on
opportunity
Facebook
to
Live. It's Friday at
today.
noon.
Just one portion of
It has been
the
a economic impact to the
We serve the many homeless people of
anything to protect MJ's office. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and thanks for this opportunity.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another community conversation right here on Facebook Live. Today's topic is faith in the age of coronavirus, and we are pre-recorded this afternoon. We'll be back live again next week, but if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section, and we'll try and address them on future shows. The holidays are upon us, Easter and Passover, and we wanted to have a conversation about how all of us as a community were persevering and how this pandemic was affecting our spiritual lives and our faith. In some cases, I think, making us stronger. And I'm really pleased to begin today with Rabbi Ariana Kaptaber, who is with the Bethel Synagogue. Welcome, Rabbi. We're thrilled to have you on the show. You're one of the newest faith leaders in Harrisburg, having arrived amidst the pandemic. And so let's start there. What was it like coming to Harrisburg with the city pretty much on lockdown and with everyone trying to practice social isolation? It must have been a difficult time to make a transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Mayor. And it was a really difficult time to come into Harrisburg. It was nothing like I anticipated. I got a chance to visit Harrisburg and Bethel Temple back in just the end of February when I was interviewing for jobs. And I immediately fell in love with the community, this beautiful synagogue by the river, such a warm and welcoming group of people who made me feel right away at home and very supported. And I continued to feel that way, even though I had to encounter them mostly from a distance and from a computer screen after that. I did do my best to meet everybody virtually as much as I could. We had Zoom meetings. I continued to make phone calls to our congregants and met people as much as I could. We had a couple of opportunities to meet socially distanced outside back in the fall, and we had wanted to continue that. But then as numbers rose in the winter, we stopped and have been doing things entirely online. Now that things are beginning to get a little bit warmer outside and more people are vaccinated and the numbers are lower in terms of infection rates, we are just starting to open our doors. And this last Friday, we actually had our first in-person service, just a limited number of people, just 20 people to begin in our sanctuary that holds many, many more than that. Everybody's socially distanced. But it was so refreshing to get a chance to sing and be with people in person, of course, masked, but still just even these moments of doing a prayer that's call and response, where on Zoom, I would begin the call and then just be facing a wall of screens that were looking like they were responding, but I couldn't hear them. To be able to do that in person was so refreshing. So I'm really hopeful that people will continue to get vaccinated and numbers will continue to get better in terms of infection rates, and we'll be able to do more things in person.
Yes, thank you for that. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and we are making progress. And I too am optimistic and hopeful that the vaccination rates will continue to improve as the supply chain unclogs. And it's good to know that you're back in person. But what do you think the toll has been on the spiritual life of folks at Bethel? I mean, it's been a difficult time for many. I know people have struggled with isolation. Yes, we can connect through technology in many ways, but how would you say folks have been able to cope emotionally and spiritually with that level of isolation?
Yeah, so for sure, this has been an incredibly trying time. And a lot of my messages in my, what we call a Devar Torah, which is a sermon in Hebrew, a lot of my sermons and my messages have been focused on maintaining hope and knowing that in Jewish tradition, we learn about the many, many times that our ancestors have been through periods of trial over our thousands of year history, and that we've come through stronger for it. And so reminding people that we have to endure this latest trial and separation from one another, but that we will come through, and we may come through into a world that's different than the one we left. Certainly, we all deeply miss our sanctuary. I hear that over and over again. We have a gorgeous sanctuary at Bethel with the most beautiful stained glass windows, and we all really miss praying in that space. But we have found ways to come together that wouldn't have been possible as much before. For example, we have classes often to learn together late in the evening in times when people might not have come out of their homes to drive to the synagogue at these late night times. Or, for example, younger parents who are putting kids to bed and who couldn't have left home because the kids are asleep. After that, they're able to get on Zoom and we are able to connect. So we have been able to take advantage of these online connection forms to find different modes of connection than we expected, but we certainly miss being in person. We certainly miss being in our sanctuary. Earlier on in the pandemic, especially around the high holidays, I was coaching people around how to set up a sanctuary type space in their homes, to put objects of value or that are beautiful, or things that remind them of Judaism around themselves in their home space and create a kind of a sacred space. But there's nothing that compares to being together, seeing one another's faces, feeling one another's physical proximity and warmth, and being in our beautiful sanctuary.
Yes, thank you for that. And I do think a lot of the ways that we've been able to connect using technology are things that will last and continue post the pandemic, and have many positive sides to them. Would you say that? Do you think our faith as a whole has been strengthened by the trials and tribulations of the past year? I know there are a number of surveys, and the Pew Research Group and others have sort of looked at this issue, and in general, Americans do believe that their faith has been strengthened over the past year. And I wonder your perspective on whether or not out of challenges and pandemics like we've faced, we can grow stronger in our faith.
It's a really interesting question. I would say an experience of trial can have really different effects on people spiritually. Everyone reacts in their own way, and there's no right or wrong way to react in a certain sense to a trauma or to a difficult time. And some people in the wake of a death of a loved one will find that Jewish community and religion is life sustaining for them. We have a lot of rituals in the wake of a tragedy that help people find stability, while others feel angry or empty in the wake of tragedy and trauma. And you can see that even throughout our tradition, that people react in different ways to traumatic or difficult events. You see in the Psalms themselves. You see some people who, write in the Psalms calling out to God for help and find this sense of strength that they say, I know that God will be with me even as my enemies pursue me, even as, I'm tearful in these times. But other people in the Psalms cry out in anger to God, say, God, how could you do this to me? How could you abandon me? And I think that our tradition, Jewish tradition, really has precedent for all different ways of reacting to difficult times, and just to know that there's space for all of it.
Sure. And let's talk a little bit about the Passover story too, and maybe its relevance for where we are, and maybe it is a story of hope that we will make it through. Can you talk a little bit about Bethel's plans for celebrating Passover, and maybe some larger lessons that could help our viewers?
Yeah, so Passover interestingly, is the most home-based ritual really that we have of any holiday, except for perhaps Shabbat, which we do a lot of rituals at home for Shabbat as well. But Passover really is not a synagogue-based ritual. We do have services for the holiday, for the holy times, but the core of Passover is a Seder, which each family will do in its own home. So, the Jewish community is marking now the second year in a row that we've had to have our Seders, our Passover Seders at home, without our large gatherings as we usually might. I know my own family, we usually have at my parents' house, cousins, grandparents, friends coming over. We'll have as many as 30 people in our house for a Seder. We set up the tables in these long rows. And last year, it was just my parents and my sister and I and my brother who was in Florida on the computer and some of my other cousins on the computer. So it's very different. This year is a little bit more open because many of us have been vaccinated. So a couple more members of my family are coming together, but still, we're certainly not having our normal 30-person gathering, and we're going to have a Zoom with my extended family ahead of the Seder. So it's a really, really different experience. But as I mentioned before, we're still taking advantage of the online platforms to form connections that we couldn't have in other circumstances. So the thing I'm most excited about that we're doing for Passover is the annual Freedom Seder that Bethel has been doing for several years. The Freedom Seder was a tradition that began in the 1960s, where Jews and African Americans came together to celebrate the Seder and the themes of Passover, of moving from slavery to freedom, commemorating both the narrative of the Jews biblically going from slavery to freedom, but also, of course, African Americans in this country having experienced slavery and moving into freedom, and the ways that those kinds of freedoms are not yet complete, that there is still discrimination and racism and anti-Semitism in the world, and the ways that we continue to seek freedom from all forms of oppression. So Beth El has been doing this. This is our 9th annual Seder. Last year, it got canceled because it was right on the cusp of that time where we were moving from in-person to online, and it was just too fast to try to move it online. But this year we had ample time to prepare. So we've sent everyone home with Passover packets with some matzah and some bitter herbs to experience from home. And we've got an incredible group of leaders, Jewish, myself, African American, as well as Latino, Muslim, and we've sort of broadened the narrative into speaking about the different ways that all of our groups have moved from fear, from experiences of oppression, to freedom. And I think that those narratives are especially resonant for us today as we're confronting the ways that racism has affected this country, both seeing, of course, the George Floyd and the aftermath, the reckoning around Black Lives Matter, as well as recently, unfortunately, the renewed attention to Asian American hatred, and the different ways that racism continues to affect this country. And this is our opportunity to come together across faiths, across races, and talk about those things and how we can move forward together to move towards greater freedom.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rabbi. And one final question. We started with a question about coming to Harrisburg, and let's end with a question about the future for Bethel, and maybe your vision, and where you hope to take the synagogue as we move out of coronavirus and into a new period for our city, and also what does it mean to you to be the first female rabbi of Bethel Synagogue?
Wow, those are two great questions. I think so. I guess I'll start with where we might go in the future. So, what I began to talk about with the Interfaith Freedom Seder is a direction that I inherited from my predecessor, Rabbi Eric Citrin, who began doing the Freedom Seder with all these other wonderful communities before my time. but I have been working to continue to build those relationships with the community to really open up the span of Bethel, that we're not just in our four walls, but rather really a presence in the community, to continue to build relationships with other communities of faith, other racial communities, and other groups around the city. So we've heard from a representative from the Bhutanese refugee community. We had a program for Martin Luther King Day, where we heard from members of the Black community and leaders, and the issues that they're still facing. So continuing to open up Bethel to the community, to make these broader connections, and to build that strengthen that relationship between the Jewish community and all the communities present in Harrisburg is an area that I'm excited to go. Another area that I am excited about is to engage Bethel in the cultural spaces and the arts, as we already, again, something I've inherited very much from my predecessor and others in Bethel. We already have a very robust book club community, and people who are reading together and engaging in cultural ways. So I began an online program to engage with the Bible and the arts, and a group of people who love to do the arts come together once a month online to look at a biblical text and create our own poetry and visual art around that. And I know that Harrisburg has an incredible community of artists. I see the murals on all the walls, and I see the notices about cultural arts that have been going on more so pre-pandemic. But as things continue to open up, I really hope to connect with the artistic community and show how much Judaism has to bring to the artistic table in terms of inspiration and in terms of artistic works that have been produced. And I will just mention one last thing that I also did in terms of the arts was Stuart Molina, who is the conductor of the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra, is our member at Bethel. We're so lucky to have him. And he and I worked together on producing a musical YouTube show for the holiday of Purim, which is kind of like a Jewish Halloween, where we wear costumes and we tell a story. And so Stuart and I worked together on this fabulous YouTube palooza of songs that we put together. And so I'm really excited in future years to engage more people and put on a really great show together. I did make fun of a little bit myself in that video where about being the first female rabbi. We have this incredible wall of illustrious rabbis, pictures of all the rabbis that came before me, and they were all men. So we had a shot in that video of all the pictures of the male rabbis, and then me sort of like, well, I don't know. I think that's a little bit where I am. You know, for the most part, I feel like I've been placed on the wall next to everyone else and very, very much accepted and embraced. And in some ways, I'm still discovering what it means to be the first female rabbi. Again, I haven't had a chance to be with my community in person so much yet. But I've felt really welcomed with, you know, being a new mom as well with my baby. You know, other congregants have brought over food and begun to offer to babysit and held the baby during services this first time that we came back in person. So I feel really supported as a mother and as a woman so far, but I'm still figuring out the kinks. You know, I sing in a different key than people are used to with a male rabbi. So people are still adjusting to that a little bit. And we'll see what other blessings that can bring.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I look forward to seeing you at Bethel. I wish you all the best, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Mayor Poppinfuse.
We're going to go next to Pastor Russell Goodman, who's the co-chair of the Mayor's Interfaith Advisory Council and the pastor of New Branches Ministries. Russell, it's great to have you with us today. I thought we could start with just a question about technology and how faith leaders are adapting to all the changes in technology. I imagine you, like myself and many others, probably didn't even know what Zoom was before the pandemic. And there certainly wasn't a lot of pre-recording of sermons or other types of things before the lockdown. So talk a little bit about how the technology learning curve has been for you and others.
I think it's fair to say that the learning curve has been steep and it's been difficult for quite a number of the folks that I know in the faith community because they weren't utilizing the technology that was there. They were not streaming at that point. And if they were, they may or have had a team that was dedicated to doing the technology for them. But the faith leaders themselves may not have had the training to utilize the various technologies. It fell to them during the pandemic to learn to do these things because in many instances they were doing their services from their homes. So they had to learn how to operate Facebook Live. They had to learn about Zoom. They had to learn about all of the things that go with that, inserting music and graphics and that sort of thing. The learning curve has been quite steep.
Yeah. So, are you of the opinion that moving forward as we get past this pandemic, that we're likely to see a sort of hybrid service combining in-person and virtual worship? What are your thoughts? Is the technology here to stay?
I think the technology is definitely here to stay. And I think the consensus is that we're moving into what's called both and. There will obviously be in-person services when we get back to some semblance of normality, but we will continue to have virtual services. I think that's pretty much where most people are right now. They see that they've been able to reach folks they never reached before, people who never stepped into their houses of worship before, and they don't want to run the risk of losing those folks. So we will see a hybrid, both in person and virtual services going forward.
Do you have concerns? I know some are fearful that maybe the return to in-person services may be gradual or slow post-pandemic. What are your thoughts in terms of how you think the gradual return post-COVID is going to work for congregations?
Well, it's in fact going to be gradual. Those faith leaders that I've spoken to who have returned to in-person services recently have seen that they are not getting the numbers that they used to have prior to the pandemic. But they're hopeful that it's going to build as we see more and more persons becoming vaccinated. And I trust that that will happen, that we will get back to something along the lines of what we experienced pre-pandemic. Question then is, will we continue to grow?
Yeah, and as you say, I've noticed myself that people are able to participate given the new technology who never participated before. I think one of the outcomes of the pandemic that's surprising for city government is that more people were involved and commenting and zooming in. So I think there is a hope that you can even expand your reach. But the question of how we shift back to in-person and what type of a hybrid services moves forward, I think is very much still in the works. We'll have to see. I'm going to ask this question of everyone. I'd like your perspective on it. How has the pandemic, in your mind, affected both your faith and the faith of your congregation? I know that we've had great periods of isolation. There's a real period of challenge and despair. How has faith helped you and your congregation move forward?
Well, let me tackle that first. I think that it's been a tremendous test of our faith, but I think what it has done is it has compelled us to draw closer to our God, because we've seen so much death and so much misery that's been caused among our congregants and in our own families. So perforce, I think we've drawn closer to our God because of the pandemic.
Yeah, there are studies that I think Pew has done and others that have shown that faith has increased amidst the pandemic as people have looked to their faith traditions as a means of dealing with the with the despair and the problems that have come with the pandemic, and death and loss. So I think that's true. Can you talk a little bit about how you have handled things like funerals and hospital visitations and other types of outreach, which normally would be done in person? How has that worked throughout the pandemic?
For me, because I've been a volunteer chaplain in both nursing homes and in local hospitals for quite a number of years now, because of the lockdown, persons in my situation have been forbidden to visit people or to participate at these institutions, at these nursing homes or in these hospitals until just recently. Uh, of course, it has been very, very difficult to deal with these situations. Funerals that I have officiated at during the lockdown have taken place at open grave sites. Very few have taken place in funeral homes, and of course, the attendance has been incredibly sparse. So the homegoing kind of atmosphere that's encouraged in many houses of worship has been completely different. It's been a very difficult time for families because of that. But it has brought those families together because oftentimes it's only the family members, the closest nuclear family, that can be present at these ceremonies.
Thank you, Russell. And a final question for you today. As the co-chair of our Interfaith Advisory Council, do you think that the pandemic has helped strengthen interfaith ties? I mean, after all, we're dealing with a worldwide pandemic, and every faith tradition is trying to cope with it in its own way. Do you have any thoughts on maybe how it's affected interfaith dialogue?
I think virtually every single person who's on this call right now has participated in interfaith programs, online interfaith programs during this past year. I think indeed it has brought the various faiths together. And we've been able to laugh together and to cry together because of the things that we were facing, during the racial turmoil, during the run up to the presidential election, dealing with the pandemic itself. I think there's no doubt about it that it has brought us closer together. And I suspect everyone here will agree with that.
Thank you. We're going to turn now to Reverend James D. Jackson of Goodwin Memorial Baptist Church. And Reverend Jackson, let me ask you specifically, how has Goodwin and your congregation navigated the pandemic over the past year?
We've done, like everyone else, the best we could. But we at Goodwin, we are an older congregation, and so we made sure that we tried to make sure that no one was left behind. So we did this virtual worship over multiple platforms. So we were on Zoom, we were on Instagram, we were on YouTube. We started a YouTube channel, which we hadn't had before, so people could go back and watch. And for our older members who didn't have that technology, they weren't used to the virtual space. We even started a conference call where they could call in and listen to the service over their lines. So we really threw the net wide and wanted no one not to be able to be a part of the worship experience in some particular way.
And do you agree with Pastor Goodman that the technology is likely here to stay? And how do you see, for your own congregation, the transition back to in-person worship?
I know for us, technology is here to stay. It's been a wonderful experience having some of our older members who were sick and shut in, being able to be back a part of worship. Shame on me for not having that realization at one particular point in time that there were people out there that needed to be a part of the family. And we were going out and, worship, ministering to them monthly, but they weren't able to come into worship. And the pandemic started us with this conference call line, and it's good to hear those old voices. So yes, I know for us, our conference call will stay. Our Bible study, our Sunday school, which we have, our teen church, all will continue to be online as we're doing it. I think it's called asynchronous, right? So synchronous, excuse me, synchronous. So at the same time we're doing it in church services, it will also be on online. Bible study. I'm hoping all of my colleagues, if you're having those religious, have seen an increase, and so people who would not normally come out have been coming out and participating in the learning aspect of our religion, and so that's been a plus. And so once we go back into the sanctuary, which we luckily were able to go back into our main sanctuary this Palm Sunday, which was extremely special to us to be there for this past Sunday as a family again. So I think it's here to stay, and I think it's a necessity for all of us who are faith leaders, if we don't want to leave people behind, to make sure they do have a way to participate in their faith.
And do you feel that the pandemic has strengthened the faith of those in your congregation and those in your circles? Do you are there particular lessons that you take or that you get comfort in dealing with the despair and the isolation of the pandemic?
Mayor, I think so. I truly do. And I think what I found is that people have now realized the need for faith. I think people said they had faith but I think they use the word as a word and not as a tool or a weapon or a lifestyle or a part of their actual spirituality. And having to live through the past year and needing to hold on to something, to grasp, to believe in something, I believe that individuals' faiths have been has increased. Um, Social isolation, not having the ability just to go out and do something, and having to be in a space and needing to cling on to something. I'm under the opinion, at least from my own congregation, that people are now taking their faith more seriously.
Thanks. And I guess as a final question, this is going to be airing here on Good Friday and Easter weekend. Is there a particular message that you take from the Easter celebrations that you think people might gain comfort from at this time?
Sure. In our faith tradition, we have a tradition of he rose early Sunday morning and he emerged out of a tomb. I think the message for our faith tradition, and I hope all of our, is as we emerge from this pandemic, we emerge different, we emerge better, we emerge with a sense of purpose, we emerge with a thought about doing for others. I think being isolated by ourselves, I'm hoping that people took less time to think about themselves and more time to think about others. And so that as we start coming out of this pandemic, we are more human. We connect with one another on a human level, regardless of what our faith tradition is. I think faith in humanity, faith in the goodness of others, faith that we are one people, regardless of everything else. I'm hoping that's what we bring out of this.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson. We're going to turn now to Imam Abdullah Diba, who is our regional missionary and is going to be representing the Ahmadiyya Muslim community here in Harrisburg at the Hadi Mosque. Welcome, Imam. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Let me start by asking you the general question as well. How has your mosque sort of engaged and adapted and developed and helped continue to spread its word and do its mission amidst the pandemic?
So I'll have to agree with the previous speakers that spoke before me that we know the journey of this pandemic in the beginning, and how while we're going through it, it became a little political. It became a bit of a blame game, and everyone kind of got distracted. And in faith-based communities, faith was something that people could hold on to because that never gets political. We get political, but the faith and our relationship with God, we can always count on. So our places of worship, and I'm sure this is across the board, became, more useful to people. And I think that's what we all saw. That's what I saw, at least. In my community, Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Harrisburg, and globally, I would say, because we are a global community, we are a national community as well. We've been utilizing technology to a great degree. But what this pandemic has done for us as a community is it made us even more global. Our activities went beyond, beyond the borders of the United States. We have a supreme head of our community globally. He then has started having these virtual meetings with members in Africa, in the United States, all over Europe, with children, with women, and all of us started benefiting from that. And this was on a regular basis. So for us, it's a huge blessing as well. But the worship, as far as the worship is concerned, most of you would know the Islamic way of worship is not just learning something, but coming together as a community. So what we did during this pandemic is encourage and teach families to bring that worship at home. Pray more with your families 5 times a day. So those who couldn't make it to the mosque regularly, when they're at home, they're a little bit more relaxed. But now we're saying, hey, since you can't go to the mosque, you have to make your home a place of worship with your children, with your spouses. So we've been pushing that and making sure that people don't forget the spirit of real worship, and that is engaging with others and crying together in one voice.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the impact on family life and domestic life and children. You've talked about how really your focus has been on bringing worship into the home and into families. The whole lockdown and everything associated with it. The health emergency has been very difficult on children and on education. Can you talk about lessons that we could all maybe draw from this experience?
And I'm sure America is doing a great job at that, right? We're seeing that the numbers in depression has gone up. There's domestic violence has gone up. Kids' schools, parents are struggling with educating their children. Like, how do I homeschool? Some parents don't know because they used to just depend on the school to do that. Now they have to do that. So we're aware of all those problems, and we're now saying, whatever solutions that are out there, the best you can do is pray together, come together. Instead of frictions and conflicts happening between husband and wife because they're not used to spending so much time together, now be one voice and pray together. And we all know across the country, there's a specific prayer time 5 times a day. So we would send out reminders. We'll teach children how to lead prayers. And we even have this effort where, young kids would also lead their parents in prayer throughout the day. So we've been trying to get as proactive as possible. And we got reports and feedback and surveys showing that family bonds have become stronger. People are learning more about their worship, how to pray, and they're seeing improvements in their own lives. Relationships are getting better, in fact, as opposed to, other things. And what we also do is, get people to get help for those who may be struggling mentally through depression or whatever. We do webinars where we, invite our professionals in those fields, medical doctors and psychiatrists, and to give talks about, to kind of help people heal throughout this process. So we've been trying to be as proactive as possible.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned already that at least the Ahmadiyya Muslim community here in Harrisburg already really has a strong international and global reach and focus. And in some respects, I imagine that that helped prepare you for the changes in technology and things. I'm thinking about the yearly celebration that happens at the farm show, the way in which you all have already used technology to help bring people together throughout the globe. Do you want to talk a little bit about the impact of the changes in technology on your faith?
Yes, absolutely. So when we have these national conventions, and Harrisburg has been enjoying hosting that for our whole community in the United States. We all converge together every year once. It's about July mostly when it happens. And it's been strange that we didn't hold it last year, and it's not likely that we'll hold it this year. When those conventions are held, we broadcast it through our own satellite international TV channel, where people are able to watch it all over the world. It's difficult that we are not able to have that physical meeting for 3 days where people from all over the nation come together for one purpose. But technology has been there to replace that. And instead of having just once, we're able to spread that out throughout the year. We're able to have speeches by different members. We're able to have webinars and talk about different subjects to uplift each other. So we didn't have that convention over Zoom or other means. We decided to just postpone it until we could do it. So that event in itself has not happened, but we're able to spread it out throughout the year using virtual resources.
Well, thank you, Imam Diba. And as just a final question, do you have a message that you'd like to extend to people watching today?
Absolutely. I think it's a message that all of us would try to, put out there, is for people to be hopeful, for people to understand that, these are difficult times indeed, but we've survived more difficult times. And life is not supposed to be rainbow and sunshine. We're not saying that this will be over and everything will be okay after that. It prepares us for, hopefully not, but worse days that may come. So it teaches us that we are resilient, we are strong, but it also teaches us lessons where when things don't go the way they're supposed to go, some people lose hope, some people, go beyond or lower than the standards of what a moral person would go through. So we should be a support mechanism for each other, be more prayerful, and expect that hopefully with the grace of God, by humbling ourselves, He will see us through all of this. And for those who have departed, it becomes our moral responsibility to pray for them and to pray for those who are still with us.
Thank you for that. And we're going to go now to Reverend Dan Caldwell, who is the chaplain at Homeland Hospice, Homeland Center. Reverend Caldwell, nursing homes, hospices, and end-of-life facilities, I can't think of any other grouping of institutions which have been hit harder really than the pandemic, and I imagine there have been particular challenges with isolation and with loved ones separated, and just talk a little bit about how Homeland and in your experience has been coping with the pandemic.
Well, you're correct, Mayor. Isolation and loss, grief, these have all been issues that all of our residents have been living with for many, many years now. And not only our residents and the people we serve in hospice care, but certainly all of their family members and friends and the staff we work with. Everyone has been experiencing loss and grief and isolation on many different levels. And that's a large part of my ministry and my work as a chaplain, both patients that we serve receiving end-of-life care and residents, but also to a much greater degree, our staff and families. These are challenging days.
Absolutely. Has there been improvement in terms of talk about Homeland specifically? I know in general with the lockdown and with the inability to see family and guests, has that loosened at all? And how is technology being used to help create a sense of continuity between families?
Well, like many of our friends have just said, for our program today, we're using technology to connect our residents, our hospice patients with their families on a regular basis. We are also, of course, now allowing for and providing for compassion visits when persons are at the end of life. Special protocols are put into place to allow family members to come into Homeland, and I'm sure this is happening at many other facilities across the region. So we're taking every opportunity we can to bring people safely together and to care for their spiritual and relational needs. But it's a great challenge. And again, it's a large part of what my work as a chaplain has been in the last year. Certainly trying to provide a ministry of presence to provide spiritual comfort and support to persons wherever they are in life's journey and whatever their tradition is, to also serve as a resource to try to connect persons that might not be in my tradition to someone in the community. So we're working diligently to try to lessen the burdens of isolation and grief, especially for the persons that we're privileged to care for and their families. It's really a wonderful opportunity to try to think outside the box and reach outside the box and care for people on a deep level and to greater lengths than perhaps we have thought of before.
Yes. And are there particular lessons that you've learned in navigating the pandemic that you'd like to share with our viewers or the group?
Well, for me, it's just again a reminder, as many of our friends have said here today, that the power of isolation, the power of grief and loss, these are great powers in our lives, and we work together across all the disciplines to provide people comfort and care and support, and especially at the end of life, or even in the weeks or months leading to the end of life, we must be vigilant for depression and sadness and respond appropriately. It's just a universal for me. I've learned a great deal that this is one thing that clearly binds us together. It's our need for grace and love, and our capacity to provide that in our own way to persons in need, to persons who are facing loss. Again, to me, that's the great spiritual, religious, universal, and certainly I have been given a lot of hope from the support of my friends in the community about how we provide that to each other. I think it binds all of us together, as we've already heard today. How do we emerge from this and rise up? How are we lifted up? How do we see a better future together? How do we move ahead, whether we're in wheelchairs or using crutches or perhaps walk freely or take the arm of another? How do we rise up? How are we lifted up? And how do we move forward into a wonderful future?
Yeah, thank you so much for your perspective. I don't know if maybe we could end with a question about, are there ways in which the greater community at large could assist in your efforts or assist in helping Homeland? I know that there's so many ways in which we're all working together to try and bring a sense of assistance amidst this pandemic. But how about for Homeland specifically?
Well, I'll say this. There are some panelists on our program today that I've invited to Homeland in months gone by, and I hope to do so again. Persons who can share from their rich heritage, traditions, and so that's one thing I'm looking forward to inviting the wider community to come into Homeland. Our residents, the people we serve, are very hungry, with a great deal of wisdom for their age, but they're still hungry to learn about the world around them, about the world's religious traditions and cultural traditions. And I'm just amazed at how people in their 70s and 80s and 90s are still hungry to learn about the world around them and to cherish the rich diversity we have in the Harrisburg area. So I've had a number of guests come into Homeland in months gone by before the pandemic, and I really look forward to having some guests to come back to our facility and speak to and enrich the lives of the persons we serve there. It gives me great promise and hope that perhaps when I'm 70 or 80 or 90, I'll still have a hunger to learn about the world around me.
Thank you, Reverend Caldwell. And We're going to go now to Bishop Michael Scalzi and Reverend Dr. Lawrence Kaiser from MCC of the Spirit and the Parish of St. Joseph. First of all, gentlemen, can you explain a little bit to our viewers about the makeup of your faith communities and how your churches have basically been able to work together during this pandemic?
Sure, Mayor. Good to talk to you. And I think I speak for everybody here when I say thank you for your leadership during this pandemic. We're appreciative to you and your staff for all you've done for the community. Thank you. We have a rather unique situation. I'm the bishop of the Old Catholic Church, and Reverend Lawrence is the associate pastor of MCC of the Spirit. And we came here, the Old Catholic Church came to this building a number of years ago and just rented space. We were looking for a place to hold our worship services. So we decided to actually Reverend Lori Hatch Rivera, who's the senior pastor here, opened up her heart and the doors of the building to us. So we began renting space here. And then something unique happened. It was called the pandemic. And instead of shutting down and just going home and waiting for the pandemic to end, our two churches worked together on joint services. And for the past year, we have been worshiping together, both of our communities, initially mainly online because people were not permitted to come into the building. But then slowly, Reverend Lori and Reverend Lawrence started implementing protocols where people could actually come into the facility and worship together. So we've taken two faith traditions that actually have no business being together in a worship service because we're kind of divergent in some of our beliefs, but we made it work. I mean, we sat down, we had meeting after meeting after meeting, and we thought, where is our commonality? Where are the things that, what are the things we share? Not the differences that we have. What are the things we share? And Mayor, we made it work, and it's worked for the past year. And only a couple of weeks ago did we kind of break off a little bit, and we went back to having our Sunday Mass for the Old Catholic Church at noon. MCC has their service at 10, but this year we're still celebrating Holy Week together.
Well, that's wonderful, and it fits with the theme of finding unity and commonality amidst the pandemic. Reverend Kaiser, can you talk a little bit about some of those commonalities that you discovered and how they helped between the two different congregations bring people together to a greater sense of assurance to deal with the pandemic?
So one of the nice things is MCC celebrates communion every week, as does the Catholic Church. So that was a great time for us to be able to expand and learn how each other does what they do, and be able to put that together and find ways to make sure that both the parish of St. Joseph and the members of MCC of the Spirit were able to still be spiritually fed, both with the preaching, with scripture readings, with the communion liturgy, and find ways to put or work together and learn from each other. I know that Reverend Lori and I have learned an awful lot about the old Catholic traditions and theology and faith, as Bishop Michael's also learned a lot about the MCC traditions and faith and their theology.
And interesting that you found that through communion itself. Could you both, in turn, speak a little bit about your own challenges in keeping the faith, so to speak, amidst the pandemic?
Well, you know, Mayor, it's interesting. Sometimes people think that all ministers, all faith leaders are not affected by the things that other folks are affected, that we are so strong in our faith, we're so solid that nothing bothers us. And there are so many times that I'm sure if we were all honest with each other, and of course we would be, that each of us has gone home at night and thinking, how do I get it together to face another day? People look to us for their example, for their strength, for just some way of getting through the pandemic. And so it's a challenge sometimes. I think that for those of us who are strong in our faith, and I speak for Reverend Lawrence, it's a bit easier. But we come across people in our congregations who during good times are teetering at best. And so you hit them with a pandemic and it's really tough. It's really tough. So we've been able to strengthen each other. Like Reverend Lawrence is the associate pastor at MCC, but during our time together, he expressed an interest in old Catholicism. So I ordained him a deacon in our church last August. And he and I have become very, very close friends. And also Reverend Laurie, who is the senior pastor here, we've all become closer. And I think we've strengthened each other by all that we've experienced each and every day. So it's some days it's tough, but thanks to each other, we've gone through things, I think, pretty well.
Yeah, and Reverend Lawrence, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, there were a couple of times where a congregant would call and, I'd almost be at a loss because I wasn't exactly sure what to do from that point to be able to help them because I couldn't be there with them physically or have them come in physically. So there was a lot of times where we would end up having to work together in order to figure out ways to serve the congregants better while they're stuck at home. And we were able to figure that out between sending out letters, cards, phone calls, emails, Zoom, and Facebook Live.
Yeah. So I guess as a final question for both of you, as the restrictions begin to be lifted and we return to in-person attendance, how do you where do you feel your particular faith communities are going to be? Do you think you'll be stronger because of the pandemic? Do you think people in the return to in-person worship will come flocking back in part because they crave that sense of communion?
Yeah, I think that people are going to start coming back slowly. I know we've also reached people that we've never thought about reaching before. And so we've actually had visitors show up since we opened the doors back up that we've never met before because they ended up finding us on Facebook or on our websites where they heard about it from somebody else and then has started to come and explore and ask questions, even from other faith traditions. We've had people from the Indian Orthodox Church come in to ask questions and see what some of the similarities are and not just the differences, and just be able to find God here as well and know that they're accepted here as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you both for being on the show today and sharing those reflections. And we're going to go now to Atika Syed, who is a representative of the Muslim community here in Harrisburg. And Atika, I wanted to ask you specifically if you could reflect on some of the challenges that are being faced by your faith community and maybe the unique role that your particular faith has helped play in overcoming those challenges.
First, thank you so much, Mayor, first of all, for including me in this conversation. It's a very important conversation to have. I would say that the very first challenge, and it was a great one, right after the pandemic began, was that the lockdown began in March, and in the month of April, we had the holy month of Ramadan. Now, to those of you who know, this is supposed to be the time for Muslims to congregate as much as possible. They get together and they pray, they cook and they distribute food, they eat together. So it's the entire month is a time to not just celebrate the month of Ramadan, but to pray together as well as much as possible. And then at the end of Ramadan, we usually have a huge congregation. Sometimes it's held at the Farm Show Complex, other times, City Island, and the people from Harrisburg and surrounding areas would get together and again pray and then go on to celebrate with their families and friends. So that was something we couldn't do this year, and it's a huge part of our faith to say. So to make that transition was a huge deal for a lot of us, and we had to figure out how to celebrate the spirit of Ramadan without getting together, without seeing each other in person, without going to the mosque, without having these iftar parties, as we call them. So that was a huge thing, but we figured it out. We knew that in spite of that, we could still follow the core teachings of the faith, and we could still provide assistance to those who needed our assistance during the month of Ramadan. For example, providing them with food and other supplies that they need from day to day. And that includes Muslim community as well as non-Muslim communities as well. So we would still go door to door. We would knock on their door, leave whatever we had brought for them on their doorstep, and drive away. So that is something that we would do on a regular basis every day. And the entire community was involved in that. The other thing is that, in all honesty, I think that it was a huge opportunity for us to reflect on our own spirituality in the privacy of our own homes. Normally, we are so caught up in the day-to-day life, and we are so caught up in the celebration that we tend to forget what the true purpose of the month of Ramadan is. And that is to increase the intensity of your prayers, to increase the charity, and to reflect on your spirituality, and to think about all the things that we take for granted every single day in our life, and to start being more grateful, and to start thinking how we can express that gratitude through our actions. And I think this year that opportunity was given to us, and we had enough time to sit with our children and to talk to our children about their faith and what the true meaning of the month of Ramadan is. So this is the huge challenge that we had to face right at the beginning of the pandemic. Other than that, of course, every Sunday we would go to Sunday school at our mosque. We would meet the kids, we would meet each other, and we would teach our kids about Islam. That is something we couldn't do. So that was, again, a huge transition. We had to go virtual, and it was a big adjustment for the kids as well. But we somehow managed to deal with all of that. There were hiccups along the way, there still are, but it's a learning process, and we're going to get out on the other end much more aware and prepared. Again, and we try to focus on all the positive things that were offered to us. And of course, this moment in history is going to be marred with tragedy as well. But it's up to us how we teach our kids and how we look upon it going forward.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for the larger context. So this, as we tape this show, Jews are celebrating Passover, Christians are celebrating Easter, and I wondered if you could educate me a little bit about, in the Islamic faith, how the Exodus is interpreted, or how Passover is understood.
Passover as well, a lot of people have asked this question numerous times of what what is the significance of Jesus Christ in the Islamic faith? What does the Quran say about Jesus Christ? Is he mentioned at all? Um, he is, of course, he is considered to be one of the mightiest messengers of God, and he has been mentioned over 23 times in the Quran, and his miracles. It's an article of faith for all of us, for the Muslims, to believe in the Immaculate Conception and all the miracles that he possessed, and of course resurrection and all of that. So yeah, that is a huge part of it. But we celebrate, for us, the month of Ramadan is the holiest of all months. And at the end of that, we celebrate Eid. That month signifies the revelation of the Holy Quran. Throughout the month of Ramadan, the Holy Quran was revealed. It wasn't revealed as a book in a single go. And at the end of the month of Ramadan was when the revelation was complete. And that is how we celebrate. And also, it's kind of like a gift from God to the Muslims who fast for the entire month, refrain from all kinds of base needs, base desires, and they do it for God, and to polish up on their spirituality. So that is basically what it is about. And in fact, the month of Ramadan is again approaching in April, so we're getting prepared for that, because again, this time we are not going to have in-person congregations, most likely, but we are preparing what we can do better this time in terms of helping people financially as well as emotionally, and how aware we can make ourselves of the social issues around us as well. It's not just about our spiritual, is linked to our social as well. And that's what we need to think about.
Yeah, yeah, and you're welcome. I guess as a final question, how do you feel about the question I've asked some of the others, which is the way in which the pandemic has affected your own faith or your community's faith as a whole? Do you think it has strengthened it through the challenges, or are there particular lessons from the pandemic that you're going to draw on that will help influence your community moving forward?
Well, I mean, I would agree with everything that has been said by the others here. When we emerge on the other side, we do emerge stronger. That is the hope. We also emerge more knowledgeable about the things that we never thought about before. For example, we know that there are so many ways of helping people without actually uh, meeting them in person. There are so many things that we can do that we would not even consider prior to the pandemic. Again, there are so many things that were considered to be essential, in all honesty, but now we know that they are pretty dispensable and we can do without them. This whole 9 to 5 thing, we can still do without that and focus on things, based on their importance there. So, and as far as the kids are concerned, honestly, I don't believe that they're being left behind academically. This is just our perception because we are trained to believe that throughout. This is how we are conditioned. They grow and learn at their own pace. They're going to adjust. Our focus should be on telling them how well they're adjusting, and how much they can achieve instead of constantly talking to them about what it is that they're missing out academically, and how it's going to affect them negatively. In all honesty, that's my belief, and it's a great chance for all of us to talk to our kids about faith. And again, there are so many misconceptions about the pandemic and about the science behind it and the vaccine and everything in every single community. This is our chance to address those issues as well. That science and faith do not uh, diverge, they can go together, and how taking care of each other and ourselves is an important part of the faith. And another important part of the faith is to not just keep that knowledge to ourselves, but to spread it to everyone else as well.
Yes, thank you, Attica. That's greatly appreciated. And we'll now go to Bazad Zandia, the elected member of the Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is, the religious institution here in the Harrisburg area. Bazad, let me ask you, how is your community sort of coping with the pandemic, and what is your focus as we look towards the light here at the end of the tunnel?
Thank you, Mayor, for having us again. I believe this is the second annual time that we are having this great conversation. Thank you. Yes, it was last March, the second week of the last March, when the pandemic started really spreading. And one thing that helped us was this, that there's a principle in Baha'i faith that there's a harmony between the science and religion. So we said, well, we have to take the science that is here to help us spiritually. And some people, they already knew something about Facebook and Zoom. And so we started with Zoom. Everything was changed from in-person to on-site. And at the beginning, of course, it was not as great as it should have been, but in about a week or two, we got a good handle on it. And more people were able to click on and get on the site, and all the hiccups, they worked out and became better. And also we helped those that they could not, or they didn't have the technology savviness to help them how to get on. Because sometimes when you don't know something, you're afraid of it. And you say, well, I cannot do this. But by helping them, even on the phone, walking them through, everything works out. And now everything is going well. And we changed all of our worship services by Zoom, all the study classes by Zoom, devotionals gathering is on Zoom too. And again, as soon as the pandemic started in March to get worse, beginning of the March for 19 days is the period of fasting for the Baha'is around the world. And it ends on the 19th of the month of March. And then when the sun goes over vernal equinox in Aries constellation, spring comes, and that's the New Year or Nowruz, which is a celebration of the end of the fasting and also ushering in the new year. So by Nowruz time, we got good enough that we had our big celebration on Zoom for New Year. And that's how we welcomed the New Year and welcome each other. It was quite an experience. And then I think somebody had made something. So sorry, I cannot serve you this, but this is what we have. But we couldn't serve it. So we made the best of it. It was still growing and getting better. And then we also realized that most likely, because everybody's cooped up together all the time, maybe some relationship may get a little bit difficult. So we ask everyone to have a family devotion time. Put aside some time, whatever time works, members of the family can share prayer together. And that helps us spiritually and grow. And then after that, we thought, well, it will be good even by telephone. Call your friends, check up, find out how everybody's doing, and then offer a prayer for each other and for everybody else. So that helped us to become spiritually connected with our friends who we may not have seen for a while. And so that helped. And so these are the things that we did. We realized that now some people that maybe could not drive, they can come to sessions. Some people that are old, they can come onto the sessions. And also, if you are not feeling that great, you don't want to go anywhere, you can still come to the session, whatever that session might be. And the spiritual assembly is coordinating all these classes or functions, so there is no overlapping. So everybody can go to any gathering, the one that they want to go. And that helped us very much.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I want to talk a little bit about how, as a faith leader, you've been able to at least get out amidst your spiritual assembly the basic messages of precaution and safety, which. It's one thing for a mayor to tell people to be socially distant or to wear a mask or to wash your hands, but as a faith leader, do you want to talk a little bit about how throughout the pandemic you've worked to help educate people and, as Attica said, make sure that science and faith are not seen as against one another?
I think that's so great to remember that science and religion are not in conflict with each other. They should have been, and will be in harmony with each other. And this pandemic is a good example of it. So every session, every communication, everybody was reminded to practice the safety, practice being distance. Anywhere you go, if you go first thing in the morning, is best time to go. So there's a less chance, hopefully you don't bump to anybody that transferred to you a bacteria or something like that. And so that really helped. And people are becoming very good at it. And fortunately, we can say that as far as I know, no one in our area that I know have contracted this virus. And although we had two deaths, we lost two friends, it was not related to a pandemic. There was other disease that happened. So it's sort of refreshing to see that there's so much scrimmages going on between science and people's other ideas, and putting so much strain on people what to believe and not to believe. And I'm happy to say that in our area, people are more ready to accept the science and accept that we can take care of our pandemic sooner than later by practicing the advice and then also safeguarding each other. Anytime we go anywhere, I can see that people all have masks on, and that's so good to see that. So we are fortunate in this area that has been less, it was less severe than it could have been.
Yes, thank you. And I guess as a final question then for today, tell us about the humanitarian fund which you've established, and maybe that can serve as a model to others as well about implementing faith into actions amidst the pandemic.
Thank you. Yes, as the pandemic got worse, we knew that a lot of people are suffering, regardless of if they are a member of the Baha'i faith or not. So we established a humanitarian fund. Everybody contributes to that, and as soon as we hear someone is going through hardship or problem, food-wise or clothing-wise or medicine-wise, anything that is emergency, from that fund we contribute and help that individual, no matter who it is. And it has been quite rewarding. And right now we have one family with several children. They have been very much giving us a pleasure of and happiness of being able to do an act of kindness. And so it's very rewarding. I recommend that to any faith community. If you are able to do that, it's great, because no one person will help that individual. So it takes a personality out, and the friend will be more readily accept a gift of kindness if it comes from through an institution. Because some people are regardless of how good our intent is, they may feel not so good about accepting. But if it comes from the whole community, they will be more accepting.
Well, thank you, Bazad, for joining us, and thank you for that the fund and your reflections. We're going to go finally to Reverend Christopher Sledge. Last but certainly not least, Reverend Sledge is the lead pastor of the Journey Church, and what a journey we have all been on over the past year. So, Reverend Sledge, let me ask you really the same question again and again. How has your congregation really coped and adapted with the pandemic?
Thank you, Mayor, for being a part of today's conversation. So I think to begin, I would say that a year ago, we started out strong. We're a younger church, so we're a little bit more nimble as a congregation. So we're able to adjust to moving online really kind of easily. And I think our congregation has remained engaged and supportive. But, you know, as I reflected upon that question, Mayor, I thought, like, in the middle of the pandemic, I actually think that people were getting a little tired, though. I think all of us were getting a little worn down. And I even felt that with myself and our team of, like, just, it felt like the pandemic just was never ending. And so I just felt in the middle of it that we were all just trying to be honest with ourselves and honest with what we were feeling. And then I would say, and I think the winter was hard for a lot of people. It was harder to be outside with people. And so, but I would say now it's beautiful outside. I have this beautiful tree outside of my office. That just makes me happy. It's this beautiful pink. So I think even my spirit is beginning to feel like that right now. Like, and things are going well. And so I'm thankful for our church who has been really forgiving and patient with us as we've navigated technological problems and trying to get better at that. And people have remained engaged, and it's been fun just to see, like everyone else has said, new people connect with us and be engaged. And that's been inspiring in the midst of all of us just trying to deal with the emotions of a global pandemic. So overall, Mayor, I think we're doing all right.
That's good to hear. Now I understand you're going to be really relaunching your in-person worship services here coming up for Easter. Can't think of a better time for such a relaunch. What do you anticipate, and how do you see the transition moving sort of post-pandemic?
That's a great question, Mayor. Over the last couple of months, we've been kind of discerning when would be the right time. And I appreciated Dr. Jackson, who was talking about coming back for Palm Sunday. And so we're launching on Easter. And so because we're a new church, we actually haven't even had an in-person Easter worship service yet. And so I couldn't imagine going another year without an in-person worship on Easter. And so, you know, the language I feel, at least in our faith tradition, feels like the last year has been like Good Friday. Just bad news after bad news, horrific things. And so when I think about relaunching or restarting, it feels like Easter, feels like the resurrection of Christ, at least in our faith tradition. And so it feels exciting. I have to say, though, our people are excited, even just to see each other. I don't even think they necessarily care about seeing me preach in person. I think it's more about just feeling like they're connected to other people again. And I think speaking to the isolation. And so we have this porch out front. And so I'm excited about just having this porch, people being able to gather outside on Sunday. I'm praying for great weather, so it's manageable to be outside and just to gather together. And so, I'm looking forward to relaunching on what we all know is just kind of the resurrection of Christ, at least in our faith tradition.
Yeah, we talked a little bit, we were getting there towards the end about the intersection of science and religion. I wonder maybe your perspective on where we stand vis-a-vis the vaccine and maybe the role of faith leaders in encouraging individuals to get vaccinated or to take proper health precautions as a key to us all moving forward.
I think that's a great question. And for me, it kind of, to answer that question, I have to think about what are things I've learned about this past year. And I think things I've learned is we've all experienced a collective trauma. We've all experienced a collective pain. And in some sense, I hope some have experienced how can a greater sense of community. Our world got really small over the last year. And we saw less people, and hopefully people begin to care for one another and support one another and reach out and lend a hand as they can. And so when I think about science and people getting a vaccine, I just think it's what I think it's I think it's a responsibility for all of us to care for the greater good of people. And I'm happy to be on my own vaccine journey of kind of getting, hopefully to get a second shot in a couple of weeks and hopefully be able to do that. And so, but part of that is if I can get a vaccine and continue to wear a mask and social distance, and if that helps less people get COVID, or if that helps less people um, die because of it, I think that's actually what maybe God would want us to do, is to care and to love for one another in that way. And another way I see the vaccine is, at least in our faith, is it's a means of grace. I think it's a means of experiencing God and a way of experiencing healing in a way that we can all collectively heal in the midst of what has been a collective trauma. And so I'm an advocate of it, and I would think that it's a moral and a religious responsibility for us to get the vaccine and to continue to wear masks, social distance as we must, to care for one another in this season.
Well, thank you. Let's end on a note geared towards those that may be watching the program today, still feeling the effects of the pandemic. Do you, based on your own faith journey through the pandemic, do you have any words you'd like to offer those at home that are watching about maybe where we're going and how we can make it if we all work together?
It's a great question. So I would say we have experienced a year of bad news after bad news. I mean, you can watch the news of the last year and not, in some ways, feel overly encouraged. In some ways, we've seen the effects from hatred that's been manifest in so many different ways to disease. And so I guess what I would want to say to anyone who wants to listen is to stay strong, to continue to be gracious towards one another. Like, some of our patient, maybe we're becoming less and less patient. So remain to be patient with one another, be gracious with ourselves. I talk to so many families and parents who just feel like they're stressed out. And so just to tell people, just like, you're doing enough. It's been a lot, but to remain strong and to remain healthy. And so to reach out to people, and maybe even in this holy season, to lean into a faith, regardless of what your faith leaning would lead you to, but lean into faith this year, looking for hope and looking for a sense of connection, to maybe not feel abandoned. And so maybe I just would end with this, Mayor, is just, friends, we've been through a lot this year. And so let's just finish the race strong with one another and continue to care and love and support one another in the midst of this global pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Reverend Sledge. That's a wonderful message to end on. And again, we have pre-recorded today's show. We wish everybody a very happy and safe weekend. I hope people are able to celebrate the holidays with their families, and I hope they're able to draw some strength in their own faith from the conversation and discussion that we've had today. But if you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comment train on Facebook Live, and we will catch them when we're back again live next week. And until then, I'm Mayor Eric Pappenfuss saying thank you all for watching, stay safe, and be well.